Welcome to this live cast on our future economies. Capitalism, despite the tremendous increase in worldwide welfare through its innovative power and freedom, has at the same time a number of negative consequences. A transition is necessary to overcome ecological destruction, decrease in quality of life, and growing inequality. Given geopolitical developments, Europe has an important role to play in this transition. In the livecast, we will start an open dialogue and discuss this transition with internationally renowned economists from all over the world. Questions will pass by, such as each week, we will discuss these matters with 2 economists, resulting in 10 online dialogues in 10 weeks, where we will share viewpoints and collect ideas on how capitalism's innovative and creative powers can go hand in hand with fostering an equal and just society. A different subject every week. Together we can build a basis for economies that are beneficial to all of us. You can participate by putting your questions and remarks in the chat. So, let's talk.
Welcome to the 6th edition of the series Future of Capitalism, a series initiated and designed by Moral Markets in collaboration with Pakhuis de Zwijger. Tonight we're going to talk about inequality on a worldwide scale, because it has been reduced, worldwide poverty, tremendously over the last couple of decades. International trade and neoliberal economic policies are said to have contributed to this success. But at the same time, it remains questionable if these successes can be celebrated, given the so-called developing countries' increased inequality and increased dependency on volatile international markets. Tonight we will discuss on how, on both the national and the international level, economic instruments can be put into place that will enable markets to serve the poor. Nobel Prize winner Muhammad Yunus will highlight the role and development of microcredits, among other things. And UN SDG advocate Jeffrey Sachs will talk on the impact on SDG goals. These 2 remarkable thinkers will be part of this dialogue tonight. Let me introduce them to you. Mr. Professor Muhammad Yunus is a Bangladeshi social entrepreneur, banker, economist, civil society leader, and of course, well known around the world because he won the Nobel Peace Prize for funding the Green Bank and pioneering the concept of microcredit. But in 2011, together with a group of persons, he co-founded the Yunus Social Business Global Initiatives, and he creates and empowers social businesses around the world to address and solve social problems around the world. Previously, and that is why he was invited here today, he was also a professor of economics at the Chittagong University in Bangladesh, and he published several books related to his finance work, the last of which is A World of 3 Zeros, The New Economics of Zero Poverty, Zero Unemployment, and Zero Net Carbon Emissions. The person who is going to be discussing with Professor Muhammad Yunus his ideas and his own vision on this is another economist, Jeffrey David Sachs. He is an American academic, public policy analyst, and former director of the Earth Institute of Columbia University, where he still holds the title of university professor. He is the director of the Center for Sustainable Development at Columbia University and president of the UN Sustainable Development Solutions Network. He's an SDG advocate for the United Nations, Secretary General Guterres on the Sustainable Development Goals, and has previously served 2 other UN Secretary Generals, Ban Ki-moon and Kofi Annan, as a special advisor related to the Millennial Development Goals, the predecessor of the SDGs. He's also the co-founder and chief strategist of the Millennium Promise Alliance, a non-profit organization dedicated to ending extreme poverty and hunger, and co-editor of the World Happiness Report. Written, of course, many books, Mr. Sachs, but the latest, The Age ages of globalization, geography, technology, and institutions. These two gentlemen are here via internet here in Amsterdam, one in America, one in Bangladesh. And thank you so much, Mr. Yunus, for doing this, because it's late in the evening already in Bangladesh because of the time differences. And the third person who is going to inspire us today is representing as a think tank of young economists, and we will kickstart this meeting with her. I hope you give her all the energy and to listen to her kickstarting this meeting. Your attention for Eefje de Gelder.
Yeah. Ladies and gentlemen, tonight we will talk about poverty and markets, a much debated topic. I would like to start with a quite depressing statement, actually. It was made 2,000 years ago. And that statement somehow always pops up in my mind when we are talking about these issues. It's a statement by Jesus saying, "You will always have the poor among you." So far, according to many reports, despite many attempts to eradicate poverty, he has been proven right. The question remains, will he be right for the upcoming decades? Or are we able to beat poverty for once and ever? Business, but also governments, will have an important role to play. The question is, who and how? Last week, a report was published by the Dutch Ministry of Foreign Affairs titled "From Education to Obligation." Companies, despite many voluntary regulations, are lagging behind in taking into account the detrimental circumstances of people in the value chains they are part of. For a long time, general awareness has been raised regarding the situation of people in countries such as Bangladesh, Vietnam, Indonesia, South Africa, and so on, who are mainly producing for Western countries. The situation of these people is often characterized by being underpaid for labor and products, detrimental working and exchange conditions, and as a consequence, lacking opportunities to live a dignified and autonomous life. The incidents in the clothing industry, the 2013 Rana Plaza accident, resulted in more than 1,000 deaths due to bad working conditions in the factory. These pictures are still vivid in my memory. However, market actors in sectors such as cotton, coffee, tea, flowers, and you name it, seem not to be able or even not to be willing to take responsibility. Particularly, I'm talking then about ensuring good prices, decent working and overall exchange conditions, and treating people with dignity and respect, recognizing them in them being human, like us. In this series of dialogues, we discuss how we can transition towards sustainable and just markets. We should take into account the way trade relationships are formed in non-Western markets and how these affect lifestyle and consumption patterns in the West. That may even imply a radical reshape of our lives. For example, a long-term rise in prices for my coffee, tea, and my weekly bar of chocolate imply that I have to spend much more on food, for example, leaving me less money for other things, such as a nice holiday. Or that I cannot always buy bananas or pineapples, and I just have to do with another boring Dutch apple. In the past, we have seen many development policies from the West, such as focusing on building infrastructure, opening up local markets, setting up fair trade programs, and so on. Still, we have the poor among us. What can we do about it now, given that we have learned many lessons? And who needs to take responsibility? In our globalizing market system, we can choose from consumers, firms, but also national Western governments, the European Union, or local governments. The report I mentioned earlier suggests three main routes that, in my view, are a good start. Businesses should start cooperating more. That will create more impact and result in knowledge spillovers all over the value chain, while as well a learning process is created. Responsibility will then be shared. National governments, second, should enforce firms to apply the principles of due diligence. That will That will imply that responsibility for the situation of the poor and the environment will become obligatory. Also for firms currently lagging behind, the so-called free riders. Third, at the European level, enforcement of due diligence can be strived for. That way, Europe can possibly make a real difference on a global scale. And not only these, also measures such as ownership of natural resources, strengthening local governments and communities, and rethinking the role of capital investors and banks can be strived for. Today's economists are both very experienced in this field, for example, regarding the microcredits and the UN Sustainable Development Goals. I am very much looking forward to the conversation about the policy suggestions and if we can shape markets in such a way that they are beneficial for all. I now want to turn back to Jesus. Not only will we always have the poor among us, he added, "You will not always have me with you." Since indeed Jesus is no longer among us, I'm glad we still have economic scientists. Hopefully you can offer a more encouraging perspective on the presence of the poor among us. Thank you.
Yes, let's go to the interview of Professor Muhammad Yunus by my co-host David van Overbeek.
Thank you, Natasha. Thank you, Professor Yunus, for being here tonight with us as well, especially given the late time in Bangladesh tonight. First off, tonight we're talking about how to align economies to end poverty. And first off, I'd like to ask you, what in your mind actually causes structural poverty in our time? What are some of the most elementary drivers of that?
Thank you. Thank you, David. I'm very happy to be here, even it's late in the evening, but this gives me a chance to see my good friend, Jeffrey Sachs. This is one occasion I can see each other. We can see each other. It's wonderful to be with you, Jeffrey. And it will be good to discuss the issue that you put it in the screen, Future of Capitalism. So I'm worried about the present of capitalism, not the future. The present is so bad, I don't think it has a future. So I should concentrate more on the present nature of the capitalism itself, how it's happening and how it's affecting us. The whole idea of your discussion here began with a quote from Jesus. So how can you start a discussion with the great quotation from Jesus when he says, "Poor will be with us"? Because from my stand always is poverty doesn't belong to any civilized human society. It's not part of the civilized human society. We can do it, and it should be put to a museum, poverty museum, as soon as possible. Poverty belongs to museum, not in human society. It should be a matter of something of the past, not in presence. And it's possible to do that. So this is where my departure with Jesus, what he said is, "You will always be with us." It shouldn't be with us at all. It should be, we should be parting with. And then you said, Jesus is no longer with us. Economists with us. We are not in safe hands with economists. That's for sure. So that we should not conclude that somehow we are in good hands. So we will start from there. The reason I say we are not in safe hands, or we are not in a good situation with the present capitalism, capitalism has created a massive problem. It's not just a tiny problem. Jeffrey Sachs and all the United Nations is trying to bring the SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals. But this is very important. But you need the very structure, very conceptual framework of capitalism has to be redesigned. The present system is not what we can live with. That's where the discussion in my book, The 3 Zeros, come. I said, this is the net result of the capitalism that we have created. It has created a massive global warming. That's what the result is. And this has brought us to the cliff where we'll be jumping off very soon. The world doesn't have much time left. The human being at least don't have much time left on this planet with the global warming. So it's a matter of a couple of decades, maybe 3 decades, something like that. It will be all over. The game will be over. That's where capitalism has pushed us. The nature of capitalism created a situation of total destruction for us. So this is one. The another one, you raised the issue of poverty. And I will see it, the poverty on the other side of the capitalism. I kept saying that in the 3 zeros, zero poverty, zero unemployment, and zero net carbon emission. But I would like to put it more directly by saying that capitalism created massive wealth concentration. That's how the machine is built. Machine is built to suck up all the wealth from the bottom and push it in the top. And this is totally not a sustainable situation for human civilization on this planet, because itself is a huge ticking time bomb. It can explode because of the wealth concentration alone. So the poverty comes from that part of the capitalism, that it continues to push all the wealth to the top in massive, obscene concentration. And it's so bad that all the wealth that we create goes in the hands of few people only, and the massive number of people remains unattached to that wealth that we create. So this is not something that we can live with. The society cannot continue with that. So this is where we end the whole situation. And third one is, again, capitalism has brought up the whole idea of artificial intelligence. And this is something which will be replacing human being on this planet, and it will be doing it in a massive way. So human being will become a surplus elements on this planet. It has no use for anybody anywhere. So that's what the, again, result of the way that we have designed capitalism. So it's not something that ordained by some supernatural power. It's just the way we, in a faulty system that we built, created all this massive problem for us. And as soon as we can get out of it, the better will be for us. So I'll stop here.
Yeah. So Professor Yunus, very clear, thank you. So in this series, we are trying to reimagine capitalism, which is one of the things that you also address in as one of the structural factors that causes poverty, right? The way that capitalism is actually built, the way we build it together. And we've addressed a couple of things in this series, for example, the invisible hand or progressive taxes or any other things. But in your book, Professor Yunus, you focus on a different aspect, which I find fascinating. I want to explore furthermore with you in depth. You say that we need to instead focus on unleashing the entrepreneurial skills of the bottom billion in order to create a mass base for building models of social business. What do you mean exactly, Professor Yunus, by unleashing the entrepreneurial skills of the bottom billion? What does that boil down to, that idea?
I'll quickly touch on these 2 points. One is the entrepreneurial capacity, and that's where I think capitalism went the wrong way. Capitalism is based on the interpretation of human being as someone who is driven by self-interest. And it has created a selfish world by itself because of that starting point as a self-interest. I said it missed the point that human being is not only driven by self-interest, it's also driven by common interest. That common interest part is completely sidetracked, completely abandoned by economists as a subject, as a theory. So we left out the whole essential part of human being, which would have created the world completely differently if we had accommodated that. So once we have this self-interest-driven economy, self-interest-driven businesses, we have created a maximization of profit as the core of the whole economic subject because of the self-interest. This is a translation of the self-interest in the business world, is a maximization of profit. If we include common interest into it, then suddenly whole economics changes. Then we need a different kind of business to serve the common interest part of the human being. So we'll have a world of two kinds of business: a business driven by self-interest and aiming at maximization of profit. Another is another kind of business to address the common problems, common interest. So it's a problem-solving business. It is completely different from the self-serving business. It is a business which is not intended to make any personal profit, but to solve problem in a sustainable way, in a business way. So that's what we have been talking about, the social business. I talk about it, and we have been creating those social businesses to demonstrate that it's something which makes sense, and it can be something which will be able to solve the problem of the world. So these are the two kinds of businesses that can continue if you can if you can put them together. Each person can do both, a business to make money and a business to solve problems. So this is one part that the social business part comes in. The other one, we said economics went wrong by interpreting human being as someone whose destiny ends up with the job seeking. So you have to find a job. So the capitalist system has created a whole notion that young people should grow up and look for jobs. And job is the only thing that they can they can get through their life. So once you get the job, your life mission is complete, and you move step by step until you retire from the job. I said that's a very wrong interpretation of human being. Human beings are born as entrepreneur, not as a job seeker. Job seeking is artificially imposed on them. So you took away the whole basic essential feature of human being. Human beings are packed with unlimited creative capacity. So that unlimited creative capacity is expressed by entrepreneurial activities of the human beings. The moment you push them into the job, you take away the creative part of human being. You put the giant human being into a little slot called a job. So you damage the whole spirit, whole nature of human being. I said, if we had designed the whole system as someone, all human beings will be entrepreneurs, we'll be saving ourselves a lot of the problems that we have created now. So we encourage, if we had taught the schools and in the homes and our education system, that every young people, that telling them that you have two possibilities, you can be a job seeker or you can be an entrepreneur. Mm-hmm. And we teach them how to become entrepreneur, we teach them how to become job seeker, and let them choose. That choice doesn't exist. So I'm saying that give the opportunity, they will become entrepreneurs. And I give the examples of microcredit. I said, look, microcredit goes to poor women in the villages. Illiterate women with the availability of financing suddenly turns herself into an entrepreneur. She starts a business. And I said, finance is the fuel of entrepreneurship. That finance is denied for the 70% of the population of the entire world. And that's how we created all this problem of job, unemployment, and the question of poverty, because we are not allowing the natural ability of human being to do things for themselves and contribute. So I say, once you open the door, once you redesign the system of a financing system, the financial system, and it's available to people, people will take care of themselves and contribute to the world. That's the point I was making, that billions of entrepreneurs. Every human being is an entrepreneur.
Yes. Thank you, Professor Yunus. I have a lot of questions and I want to save them for a discussion right now. Thank you so much for the comments for now, and let's move on to the next interview.
And my co-host David van Overbeek is going to interview Jeffrey Sachs.
Thank you, Natasha. Thank you for being here with us tonight, Professor Sachs.
Pleasure.
Tonight we're discussing about how to align economies to end poverty. And I want to start off with your book that you published in 2015 and move on later on to the latest book you've just published. In your book, The Age of Sustainable Development, you analyze the challenges of achieving economic growth while protecting the environment and achieving an equitable distribution of resources. This is also the theme of tonight, no surprises there. Before we start with the book, I'd like to ask you the question, what is the biggest myth concerning sustainable development that you keep hearing?
Well, I think there are many misunderstandings, but the most important thing to know is that it is achievable. We have to get beyond platitudes. We don't have a free market economy. We shouldn't have a free market economy. We have a mixed economy with complex institutions, and our job is a complex one to understand better how to change institutions in light of changing needs. I'd actually like to go back to Jesus for one moment, if we might. He did not mean what could be casually interpreted in Matthew 26. He was specifically saying, when this woman is anointing me, she's preparing me for my burial. He was not making a sociological statement, nor was he making a forecast 2,000 years later. And I think it's not helpful, actually, to take these things out of context. But Jesus is with us in a different sense as a great moral teacher. Among great moral teachers in our history, he reminded us to be kind to the poor and said that feeding the least among thee feeds me. And that, I think, is a present sentiment, which is that our societies need an ethical orientation to ensure that there is availability of human dignity and basic needs for everybody on the planet. And unlike Jesus's time, which was a time of mass poverty around the world in agrarian societies, there is plenty right now to ensure that every person on this planet can meet all of the basic needs that are given as human rights in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And that means universal access to education, universal access to healthcare, universal access to social protection, and so on. And what is important is to understand what kind of institutions, partly markets, and within markets, partly kinds of companies, but also government playing a central role, because in the Netherlands, you get your health care because the government mandates that there should be health coverage for all. This is a basic decency in a well-to-do society, and it's possible to have that for everybody in the world. So we need to understand that economics is more complex than markets. It's more complex than a debate about any particular, even kind of business, though I greatly appreciate social business as a major component of a decent society. Because a functioning economy in the real world needs to have government, it needs to have a social business sector, it can have a very healthy private business sector as long as politics are not corrupted by money in politics as they are in my country, for example. And so I just urge us to have a more sophisticated discussion globally to understand that the goals we've set, the Sustainable Development Goals and the Paris Climate Agreement, are technically within reach. We're a very rich world, but we need taxation, redistribution, public services, public investment, proper company law that is up to date with our needs. Instead, we have a kind of mythology of the free market as if we're still living in 1776 with Adam Smith's wonderful book, by the way, but after all, it's 250 years old. So it's a historical text. It's not a current text, nor should we live with the simple-minded ideas that you would get maybe out of a bad economics textbook about the invisible hand and free market and so forth. These are myths that help us to understand certain things, but can blind us to other things. The world is more complex, and the institutional framework that we need to ensure well-being and human dignity is fundamentally a mixed system with private ownership, public services, public ownership, and many different streams running into into social outcomes, but grounded in an ethics that calls on us to ensure that everybody has dignity and everybody can meet basic economic needs. And I can tell you, we can go into it at any length, but there's plenty available to ensure that in an environmentally sustainable way.
So the Sustainable Development Goals are one of the means in which we are trying to achieve that. The Sustainable Development Goals can be seen as sort of an expansion on the Millennium Development Goals in order to address extreme poverty, environmental degradation, political, economical injustice, and so forth. Let me get your assessment, Professor Sachs. The Sustainable Development Goals were formulated in 2012. Has enough progress been made since then, to your mind?
Well, in 2012, governments took the decision to have Sustainable Development Goals, and they were negotiated over 3 years and then adopted in September of 2015. Then my country did something really, really stupid, which was to bring to power a psychopathic president, Donald Trump. And I hope that we're getting rid of him next week in our elections, because this was a huge setback for my own country and for the world. The United States is an important country, and it has a terrible leader. And that has created a huge mess over the last 4 years, because what has Trump done? He's tried to break the global cooperation that is needed. He never says Sustainable Development Goals. He has walked out of the World Health Organization, out of the Human Rights Council, out of UNESCO, out of the Paris Climate Agreement. And so this is a big problem, because we have a powerful country that still some in Europe know is important as the lead country of NATO, for example, but with disastrous leadership right now. So to achieve anything, we need politics, and we need enough public understanding. And I really hope that the United States public delivers next week. It's no sure thing, by the way, that we'll count the votes right or how they'll come out. But if we have Trump continuing, we will not achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. I fear that we will actually descend into global conflict. If we get rid of Trump, then we have the opportunity both to stop the pandemic, because this terrible president has done nothing to stop the pandemic in the United States, and then we can get on to sensible rebuilding and global cooperation. Yeah. But let me just give one pertinent example in this. During the pandemic, the online economy has soared, of course. So we live online, basically, many of us. And those who own the portals of the online economy, like Jeffrey Bezos or Mark Zuckerberg, have had an increase of wealth that is virtually unimaginable for us. There are now 500 people in the world that have a net worth combined of $6.8 trillion. And the top 10 people in the world have a net worth of basically $1 trillion. Now, the United States political system is so corrupt that these people are not paying taxes properly. They are not contributing to the public good adequately. And this is something that needs to be addressed. If you have 500 people with $6.8 trillion of net worth, it tells you two things. One is just a few people in the world could finance the solutions for billions of people. Literally, a few hundred people could finance solutions for billions of people. And second, they're not called to do so. They're not reading Matthew 25, where Jesus says it's your responsibility, or that for a rich person to enter heaven is like a camel passing through the head of a needle. As not to quote scriptures too much, but the point is that we do not have a balanced society right now. We have an imbalance of wealth that is so huge that solutions that are at hand are not being taken. And when you get so deranged as this, you end up with a deranged leader and even a rich country that can't stop an epidemic, which is what we have right now. We have a rip-roaring epidemic because we have a nut as president, basically. So this is the real situation that we're facing.
So in your book, The Ages of Globalization, your latest book, you draw upon, among many other things, you draw upon a history of globalization in order to understand why we are here, where we are now today. And I'm just wondering if you could quickly comment on that, Professor Sachs. How can a history of globalization help us to that extent, help us to better understand the challenges that we face today, some of the challenges you just mentioned?
We should understand what globalization has afforded in real progress, what it has cost us, and what we can learn from history. So globalization has included a sequence of technological advances that have had a profound beneficial effect on human society, from the mobilization of mass energy at the beginning of the industrial era to electrification and now to the digital age. And poverty has diminished remarkably around the world because of this. That's the positive side. The negative side is that globalization has come along with violence, with war, with suppression, with deaths of untold millions through abuse of the powerful and the rich. And that has been part of the history as well. The third part of the history is a growing consciousness over time of our common stake in the world. Because the idea of a common humanity around a common framework, while it was part of the prophetic vision of Isaiah and Jesus and so forth in the biblical terms and of other sages, in practical terms, this is an idea that's only around 200 years old. And in modern terms, the UN is in its 75th year this year, as it was established in 1945. We're still in the early stage of trying to make a global civilization that is truly civilized. And this is our greatest challenge right now. We have powerful technologies that could end poverty if we use them properly in this mixed economic setting with a global moral agenda.
Yes.
But if we don't do it, we can end up destroying ourselves, as has been the case of other transitions in history.
Oh. Well, I think we've had a great setting of the scene so far, and quite the sense of urgency from both our speakers. Let's move on to the next part of the debate, the discussion.
Yes, and in this part of this session, we cross the two speakers, of course, and it's an open and free discussion, hopefully, from two parts of the world. But of course, you already said that Professor Yunus already said that you're very happy to meet each other in cyberspace. So let me first start by asking Professor Yunus to respond, of course, to what Jeffrey Sachs called a sophisticated discussion on what kind of institutions we need today.
Yes, definitely. This institution is the key. But before the institution, what I'm saying that we have to find out what is the purpose of the economy. What is it that we want to achieve with the economy?
Yes.
That purpose is very important. Then we build up the pieces. That's what we do. The institutions combine because we want to achieve that kind of thing. It's like building your softwares. Once you have the hardware, then you have the softwares, how you make it happen. For example, we talk about financial institution. Coming back to my own experience of financial institution. There is an institution there. This institution is building is complete, but it's designed in a completely wrong way. It serves the purpose of the people who are at the top, rather than serving everybody who needs their financing and so on. So the massive number of people are missed out completely from the financial system. And I was making the point that entrepreneurship is fueled by the financing. So if the financing institution is not available, that entrepreneurship doesn't come out in the forward. And during the pandemic period, we have seen how billions of people lost their income, lost their livelihood because of the lockdown, because of the sudden nature of the coronavirus attack on their people. And that made it very vivid that how tenuous the life of the people at the very bottom is. And these are the people who belong to the so-called informal sector. And I was again pointing out, look, you don't call it informal sector, then you will describe them in a very dismissive way. We should be recognizing them as a micro-entrepreneurial sector.
Yes.
These are the people who are doing things on their own. And the government was not involved in it. Finance is not involved in it. They found their own finance from the loan sharks. And the loan sharks are the one who benefited from their existence because they are the one, and the micro-entrepreneurs making whatever income they make, the bulk of it goes into the hands of the loan sharks because there's no formal institutions we have designed. So the wrong design of institutions is a reason why we have created all these problems. So that's the point I wanted to raise. An institution is important. It's what kind of an institution?
Okay.
What purpose? The purpose has to be defined.
But both of you said something about the purpose. Professor Sachs said that we need an ethical orientation towards human dignity. Yeah. And you said, of course, that poverty should belong to the museum. So a civilized society does not know poverty anymore. So if we would ask ourselves, what kind of institutions should we design if we are rethinking, reimagining capitalism in this series? What do we need to change if we want to reach that purpose? A poverty-free world, a poverty where human dignity is met, is for all humankind. What institutional changes do we have to think about, Mr. Sachs?
Thank you. First, let me say that I think a good starting point for us is the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the UN Charter, and the SDGs, the Paris Climate Agreement, the Convention on Biological Diversity. Indeed, I think we have a lot in place. Second, I think it is important that, say, the Dutch economy domestically or the social democracies of the Nordic countries, I believe are very well-functioning societies within these questions. Poverty is extremely low. Human freedom is high. Prosperity is high. Mobilization of technology is high. The commitment to moving now to a zero-carbon economy is strong. I don't want to pat you all on the back so much, but I do think that from a practical point of view, if the world lived like Holland or lived like Sweden or Norway, we'd say pretty good for humanity. Well done.
You know that in our measurements, I mean, we score last in the European Index for Sustainable Energy.
Right. So I know because you had natural gas, you had many things, but it's time to move on.
Yes.
And I believe you will do so. But I think that the European Green Deal is a very good practical question. So the question is, what's missing? Or what would it take, to put it in a simple-minded way, for the world to live like the Netherlands or like Sweden? Is that possible? Some people would say, oh my God, no, that would break the planet 10 times over. That's not quite true. It depends on how we use energy. If it's from fossil fuels, disaster. If it's from wind and solar, we do just fine because we have plenty of that available and good technology. What is missing, among other things, lots of pieces, but one is the international financing side doesn't work. And let me give an example. For the Netherlands to live like it does in a cohesive society, taxation is nearly 50% of GDP. And then there's massive distribution of public services, universal access to health and education and infrastructure. Because the Netherlands understands to live in a decent way, you have to tax heavily and redistribute. And this is completely true. But we don't do that globally. So we leave the poor behind globally because all of this redistribution stops at the national border. This is, back to Westphalia 1648, the idea that we live in a nation-state world and you don't really have to care about others, or maybe you want to conquer them, or maybe you give 0.7% of GDP to them, but you don't really think of them deeply. This is the first thing that we need to overcome. We need a global understanding and a global fiscal system. I'm not saying that we're going to transfer 50% of world income globally, but 0.7 of 1%, is that the best we can do? And by the way, the United States has rigged the system together with the UK and a few other countries, and Netherlands plays this game and Switzerland plays this game to provide tax havens so that the rich people can hide their money. And the Dutch sandwich is part of many of these tax deals. So we don't play fair globally. We do well domestically. That's where the votes are. That's how it's organized. But when it comes to being global, we say that's someone else's problem, or here's a tax haven to hide your money, or some other thing. So what's missing is the global systems, in my view. That's one part. Second quick point. The Netherlands has a quite progressive view of what businesses should do. Multi-stakeholder ideas are built into Dutch company law. And that's why a company like Unilever really is a leader in sustainability compared to Kraft Heinz, for example, which is a hedge fund run company in the food sector. So what Muhammad Yunus has been championing is better corporate governance, whether it's social business or B Corp or multi-stakeholder corporation. This is another piece of the puzzle, because in my part of the world, we got a lot of nasty businesses that just want to make money no matter how much they destroy the rest of the economy. And the first rule of life should be do no harm. The Hippocratic Oath applied to corporations, applied to our own behavior, applied to our national behavior. And in this sense, I think that this is another part of the institutional reform that we need.
Yes, clear. Professor Yunus, would you like to add on?
Yeah, I would say I agree with Professor Sachs. But at the same time, I want to add that with all the dysfunctionality that we see in our politics, and you just started saying about what is happening in the USA, the richest country in the world, most sophisticated education, technology, and all those institutions that you have, you end up with a very dysfunctional political system, where suddenly you have a leader like Trump emerging and do almost anything he wanted to do. Nothing could stop him. Even in the pandemic situation, when today, the denial of it, it's amazing. I was shocked to see that even at this moment, he is totally denying that it is peaking and you're denying. And how do you rely on a government like this? How do you rely on a politics like this? So this is my worry, that you come to a country like Bangladesh, country like India, country like many other countries where politics is such a difficult thing. It doesn't lead to the way that you have examples like Netherlands and Holland, other countries there, Scandinavian countries, Sweden and so on. It's very difficult to get to them. So how much reliance we'll make to those kind of institutions? Another one, I try to add to kind of relieve myself of this work, so and inspiring the individuals to take actions. And you should not be relegating all the responsibilities to the government to do that. Then government can do all kinds of wrong things. So while government should be entrusted with to giving some responsibility, but at the same time, individuals should not stay aloof from that. Individual can contribute in a much powerful way. That's why I try to put the opportunity as a social business as an opportunity to do that. You take that piece, it may be a small piece, but you have a chance to do that. You are not removed from all those things. That I do good business, I'm a responsible citizen, I pay my taxes, my job is over. That should not be it. Doing other things, that the common things, as I said, the common interest, should be the responsibility of the individuals. So I bring individuals in a more important position in that scenario. That's all I wanted to add.
I think that this is a very important and pertinent to understand, because there are many ways to organize our social life, more individualistic, more around government or collective action, and so on. And we need, first of all, a mix, because you can't rely on any particular one institution, whether it's government or markets or individuals and so on. This is one point. And a lot of good social thought is to understand why different kinds of institutions apply in different settings. But when Muhammad Yunus invented microfinance, one reason he did it, I think it's fair to say, is that Bangladesh was a new country with completely dysfunctional public. There was no government. So he said, I have to do something. We have to act. If you had government, that could do certain things that one wouldn't have to do the other way. And so this question of what is needed where is very context related and also historically related. I would say that as much as we would try to do without government, we can't, because government is fundamental. But when government is bad, it's awful. It's absolutely awful. And by the way, you know, it's also interesting to ask, what is wrong with the United States, a rich country, a free country, you know, a long institutional history? But a lot of what's wrong, by the way, is racism. Trump is a reflection of racism in America, which is very deep. He's got a strong white base. It's a very long story and a very particular story. But it is a kind of social dysfunction that has gotten worse over time because a plutocracy developed as well around our democratic institutions with very big money, big wealth inequality, and social tensions. And it's a long story, but it produced a Trump who's a kind of monster on the system and very dangerous for us and very dangerous for the world, I might add. Yeah. There's no easy answer to this except voting him out of office.
No, but Professor Yunus, that is of course why you say let's focus on individuals, because there is a danger in relying too much on governments, because even a well-established democracy like the United States can produce leaders like Trump. So you are worried that if we focus too much on, for instance, a global discussion on tax, like Professor Sachs is suggesting, you are worried that we won't meet the goals we want to meet, the purposeful economy which serves a situation where there is no poverty. Can we rely on these entrepreneurial spirits? It's about the same. It's the same discussion, but on the other side, can we rely on the individual entrepreneurial spirits to reach that purpose, to reach that goal?
Yeah, entrepreneurship alone will not do the job, because entrepreneurship can be used for the wrong purpose. Yeah. To extract money from somebody else. Yeah. And become such a loan shark or something like that. It's what do we going the wrong way. So that's why I'm saying that another entrepreneurship for social business, the people that can. For example, I can pay taxes. And assuming that government will use these taxes for good purposes. I say, why don't I use this for good purposes if I have the good intention? Can I have the good intention? And I'm saying, yes, it's possible, because we have to design a system where I say, yes, I can make whatever I pay the taxes, I do pay the taxes, but still I have money with me. I can do things, invest in things to solve the problems. Start with a small way, but I can replicate it, continue to expand it, because it's a business. It's a self-sustaining system. It's not something that is not a charity money that I come to the end of this money. Money continues to grow within a business, so I can create that. So as each individual can have two split personalities in that. I can have the entrepreneurship for making money as a conventional business, and also create businesses to solve problems. So that way you can expand that opportunity. If you look at the young people, many young people start their life with great ideas to do things for the people, do things for the world. But they are pushed into the side where you have to work for big companies to make the money. And then I lost the whole appetite or opportunity to do the things I wanted to do. If the social business opportunity existed, I said, no, I don't want to do that. I want to create my own social business and achieve the goals that I have set for myself. So that should be encouraged, that individual want to do things rather than surrender them and then either take a government job or take a private job and go in a completely different direction.
Yes.
Could I come in on that? Yeah, just to say, if you look at, say, the World Happiness Report this year or the Sustainable Development Index report, Netherlands, one of the top countries in both. But if you look at the top 10 or 20 countries, all of them have a high level of taxation and a high level of government services. There's a reason for that. If we are really going to have health for all or education for all, there is no proven case anywhere in the world other than through government provision.
Clear.
I want people to know that.
Yes.
So Muhammad Yunus lives in a country with very difficult governance. I do right now myself. We have to put attention to fixing governance. It's not so simple. Politicians can be awful in certain contexts, quite dangerous, in fact. But governance for the human good is extremely important. It's an idea that my favorite philosopher, Aristotle, wrote about 2,300 years ago, that politics is for the thriving of the society, of the polis. And I don't want that to go away, because we need to fix government also if this is going to work.
Clear. If we want to reimagine capitalism, we also have to strive for functioning government. Clear,
Absolutely.
clear. Mr. Yunus, it's very late in Bangladesh. So I'm going to ask you to give your closing statements, and then I'll have some questions from the audience, but I'll direct them to Professor Sachs. So for you now, the opportunity to give some closing remarks.
Well, I would like to mention that we are going through a pandemic period now. That pandemic has given us lots of experience, lots of time for reflection, what we have done right and what we have done wrong. And we see lots of wrong things emerge in front of us. And at the same time, I see tremendous amount of eagerness to go back to pre-pandemic world. And I keep raising the question, why do we want to go back to the pre-pandemic world? That was a terrible world. That's what I started saying, that it's a world with the global warming, with the wealth concentration and all that. So why do we want to go back? Why don't we take this opportunity to go a different direction? Now that we have somehow slowed down or stopped, so this is a good opportunity to redesign and redirect ourselves. And if we have created a world of global warming, we should be creating a world of zero net carbon emission. So that we take a completely opposite turn. If you have created a world of wealth concentration, we create a world of zero wealth concentration. Why don't you start with that? Well, if you have gone into massive unemployment, why don't we go for zero unemployment? So this is an opportunity to design and make the first step in the right direction, rather than going in the wrong direction. So basic decision should be right now, no going back. Let's try how to make that happen, and let's achieve the goal that we set for ourselves.
Thank you so much. I also saw your plea for that a global vaccine for the virus should be a global common good.
That's right.
Yes.
It should be a global common good. Indeed.
Yes. Thank you so much for participating from Bangladesh. I'm going to say goodbye. Thank you so much. And I have some questions for Professor Sachs now, but thank you for joining us,
Thank you,
Professor Yunus.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Yeah, because Professor Sachs, of course, the conversation between the two of you, we don't have to ask any question, because you can just have a conversation among the two of you. But we have actually some people who are watching this and who want to participate.
Wonderful.
Let me go to one of the things which you said. Was that the corrupt system, of course, in the US, your Trump story. She says, Elisa Terragno Bogliacini asks us, but in the SDGs do not seem to tackle the power imbalances in the world. And that's also, of course, also related to Eefje's opening statement, where she said the power imbalances, for instance, in supply chains should really change. How do you comment on that statement?
The idea of sustainable development and the sustainable development goals is universal access to human goods. And so in this sense, it is subversive of high inequalities, believe me. That's why it is resisted or ignored. But SDG 10 specifically calls for reducing inequalities within and among nations. That's a breakthrough. I don't know how the U.S. ever signed on to that. It's so different from our dominant ethos sometimes, but it's a very important goal, specifically agreed by all governments to reduce inequalities. There's no magic to reaching utopia overnight, but the Universal Declaration, the SDGs, and the Paris Climate Agreement all point to universality, social justice, social inclusion, and reduced inequalities. And within that context, we have our politics ongoing at every moment.
Yeah. So perhaps an example here, Professor Sachs. Recently, we heard about the lithium extraction in South America, and I think this is one of the examples in which you can see kind of this core-periphery dynamic on a globalized scale, where we have this core, the Western world, perhaps, and in the periphery, where all the, for example, the lithium is mined, or the cacao beans are grown and then shipped towards the Western world. And I'm just wondering, within this dynamic, and you could use the lithium extraction as an example, the government always seems, the local government there seems to sacrifice the long term for the short term, giving the contracts to multinationals who help them with the extraction, but not actually providing the know-how to the local community in order to come up with their own industry, for example, to not only dig up this lithium, but also process it perhaps, or some other high-tech, develop some other high-tech jobs or high know-how knowledge jobs. So I'm just wondering, how can we break this dynamic that we keep on seeing, actually?
Well, we need transparency and international law, this is not impossible, because it does occur, but it is threatened. The United States historically has been a bully in Latin America, and when it didn't like a government, it overthrew it. Even today, the United States is imposing unilateral sanctions that are devastating on Venezuela. I'm no fan of the Venezuelan regime, by the way, but I am completely against unilateral U.S. sanctions, which I regard as against human rights and against international law. So I would like to live by international law and by the UN Charter. And it's a little like the Ten Commandments, I suppose, or anything else, which is that these ideals are not lived up to. But it doesn't mean that we live in a complete cynicism as a response. Rather, we need to do better.
Yeah.
And we need transparently to hold ourselves to account, because we have reasonable ideas of what is decent. We just don't honor them when you have indecent leadership like Trump or others. But frankly, I have some confidence in Europe playing that role if it is not cowed in that. For example, Europe is talking about, Germany is very advanced in talking about sustainable supply chain legislation. Please bring it on as soon as possible. This would be a practical advance.
Thank you so much, because that is actually the question Johan Gelderblom wanted to ask you. He said, if the global role of the US is problematic at the moment, what do you expect from Europe? Can they play a more active role than they already are playing? And this, of course, is a practical suggestion from your part to actually, well, fill in that role.
Let me say this, and I mean it seriously with some note of alarm. If somehow Trump stays in power, the dangers for the world are extremely high. The man is mentally unstable and very dangerous, in my opinion. If Biden is elected and peacefully takes office, which I count on but can't be assured, the situation will look vastly better, on the other hand, than it does right now, because we're going through a period that is absolutely irrational, and Biden is a rational and decent person, both individually and politically. So we would have a much better chance of decency if Biden is elected.
Clear.
Now, having said that, Europe has done something extremely important this year. and that is adopt the European Green Deal. This is really a wonderful framework. It's the most sophisticated, advanced framework we have. You should be very, very proud of Frans Timmermans. He is really the author of this. He's our leading global politician in sustainable development, has done a wonderful job. And Europe has provided a kind of role model because it is decarbonized the energy system, it is farm to fork land sustainability, it is a circular economy. Those are the three big pillars that we need. And then Europe went on properly on wonderful diplomacy. The High Representative VP Borrell's discussing with China. And China, lo and behold, announced net zero by 2060 at the UN, President Xi. Great step forward. Today, Japan has announced net zero emissions by 2050. Big advance. President Biden will announce that January 20th, 2021, if he comes into office, which we're counting on. Then we're going to start to see, the pieces could come into place for some decency in this world. But I would say Europe has the lead right now on sustainable development and the most coherent framework, and it's one that I think can play a leading diplomatic role.
Yeah, thank you so much. There were also some other questions about whether, if you talk about that only a few people have trillions of dollars, whether we can solve poverty only by redistributing that money. If we would be finished if we would just do that, but of course the entire talk we had already is already your answer. So I'm going to leave it.
Let me just give a quick point on this. Enabling people to have basic health services and children in school is probably an incremental $100 billion or so compared to the current flows from the rich world.
Yes.
If you have $6.8 trillion of wealth, and imagine that you put that into a foundation or a trust, and it has a 5% payout, that is $340 billion a year from 500 people. That is enough, actually, to get every child in school and everybody covered by at least a rudimentary primary health system. It's unbelievable, but it's actually true. Now, it's not enough to achieve sustainable development. That's trillions of dollars of investment in renewable energy and in new infrastructure and many other things. But these few people really could make a huge difference in saving millions of lives and getting hundreds of millions of kids in school, for heaven's sake. Come on, Mr. Bezos and others and your friends, it's time to do it, because Mr. Bezos has $190 billion in his bank account today, $190 billion.
Yes. Clear.
Okay.
Thank you so much for answering that. We're going to go to the final part of this session, and that is where we ask Eefje back to reflect on this. Let's do that. Yeah, welcome back. You kickstarted the session, and then, of course, Professor Sachs and Yunus took over. What are your thoughts?
Thank you, of course. I was happy that my quote apparently raised so much attention.
Starting with Jesus kickstarted the meeting, yes.
Actually, it's also in the Mosaic laws, actually, so that quote, because I looked it up, of course. And
Deuteronomy 15, I think it is.
Yes, exactly. You are, I think you must be a Protestant, knowing these chapters so well.
Biblical knowledge on the table, yes.
Yeah. So I was actually the quote really always bothers me, because during my research I'm working also beating against poverty, of course, and you have these moments that you think, you always have the poor, so whatever we do, it doesn't seem to have a real impact, or at least we are very limited. And therefore I also see these very huge inequalities in the world, and that I sometimes think, I just drop giving some things to the poor, because those people with having the funds, they can solve it so easily. So I was very happy that Professor Sachs actually pointed to that in the last remarks. And I was also happy to see that he sees a role for Europe there, because I also think that Europe now is at play. But still, I was wondering, given the situation we are in with the US, and also given China's policies, if Europe is going to be like the bravest guy in the classroom, aren't we can we still be competitive in that way? You know, if you're going to really enforce firms to put, for example, due diligence, the products become more expensive, that kind of things. How is that going to work out? That was still a question that I was going through in my mind.
Yeah, and so bravest, you don't mean bravest, you mean the one who's always listening to the rules and being
the most obedient.
Yeah, obedient person. And are we the ones who are going to say, okay, we should do it by the book?
True.
And other continents and geopolitical players won't do that.
Yeah. Is it actually going to be a race to the bottom, or is it going to be a race to the rock?
Yeah.
Oh, this is a very interesting question, right? I mean, Professor Yunus also mentioned that with considering the free rider problem, and we see that everywhere as well. And I think maybe we can ask that Professor Sachs to just comment on that. Do you see that there is a trade-off actually there between trying to be competitive as a country and as well maintaining these standards or adopting these new laws? Do you see that trade-off there as well that Eefje is worried about?
I don't actually, because I think moving forward on sustainability in general will be a good investment, whereas, for example, in the United States, hundreds of billions of dollars have gone into the old fossil fuel industries, and that's going to be scrapped. That's going to be stranded assets. So Europe actually has to move forward on electric vehicles, renewable energy, and so on. And I think gaining the international expertise will not only be an incentive and inspiration to other regions, but actually it will serve European industry well. I would hate to see, for example, the automotive industry hold back saying, no, we can't because others aren't. And then you lose the automotive industry, and that would lose a lot of the core of European manufacturing. We need Europe to build the best electric vehicles as it built the best internal combustion engine vehicles. And this is something that I think the forward movement is extremely important in bringing about. I'd like to see Europe play a bigger role in the digital world, actually. I'm a little worried about Europe being between these two giants that are somehow dividing the digital world, and Europe having GDPR and digital privacy, but not having digital giants. So I would like to see Europe develop its own leadership in this. And don't let us buy Ericsson. That should stay in Europe and not fall into the hands of the clutches of the United States.
Yeah. Protective industrial politics.
Yes, I think it's actually, if it's constructive in the right direction, not to protect the old stuff, but to help foster the new stuff, I'm in favor of it.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's why you said, of course, I want a sophisticated dialogue on what institutions you need, because you cannot talk in cliches. It depends on the context. Yes, Eefje, you started with Jesus, and then we somehow had this biblical knowledge on the table, but you also talked about the responsibility of individuals here, right? Yeah. Is that worry or that you have, is that been discussed enough this session?
The worry in the sense that the poor will never reduce. Well, I think I am quite pessimistic on that, but the session is encouraging in this sense, and I still feel somehow always the urge, which is actually mentioned in Deuteronomium, in the Mosaic law, that because we have the poor always with us, you have to always give them what they need, and you have to give them autonomy and dignity.
Yeah,
so
it's a moral obligation.
And that's also what Jesus, of course, also points to in his overall teachings. And somehow I always feel the urge to still strive for reducing poverty. Yeah. And I feel that now again after this session,
I think
so
that's good because both speakers actually spoke to that, right? The ethical notion,
exactly,
as with the UN Declaration as a starting point, and the SDGs and the Paris Agreement as the manifestation of a worldwide acknowledgement of that moral obligation.
Exactly.
Yes. Thank you so much for that. Thank you so much, Professor Sachs, for joining us in
Great pleasure. Thank you.
In this discovery we are doing in a public way. Next week, we will be back with the 7th edition of this series with Anne Petit-Fleur and Julia Steinberger on environmental pressures and economic solutions to that. If you want more information, please watch deswijger.nl, or if you want more information on the project, the Future Markets Consultation, watch moralmarkets.org. Thank you so much for watching and having all these brilliant questions. Thank you for joining us, Professor Yunus and Professor Sachs. And thank you, Eefje, for your kickstart and your inspirational column. Thank you, and see you next week.